Welcome to part 2 of watercolor techniques. So we're going to cover 4 more techniques plus a bonus technique. And so remember that before you start, you want to have some water in a cup, and you want to have a paper towel, and then you want to clean the cover of your watercolor kit so that you have a mixing tray. So the first technique we're going to cover today is called glazing. Glazing is where you paint over a color that you already have on your watercolor paper. With glazing, what you do is you mix up a color that will either be the same or a little bit darker than a color you already have, and you would paint over that. And then what this does is allows you to create lighter spots in the color that's underneath by adding a color that's on top. And oftentimes even if you add the same color on top of the color underneath, the color underneath becomes the lighter value. And then that can show things like highlights or just be a less intense color than the one you're laying on top. So you're sort of using what you've already put down as a base layer and then adding color on top. So I'm just doing some glazing with the same orange I made yesterday, but because it's a new day and I'm adding another color, I'm adding another layer of that orange. The one underneath becomes the lighter color, and the one on top, the glazed layer, becomes the darker color. Technique 2 is 2-color gradient. So for this, you're going to want analogous colors. I mean, you don't have to use analogous colors, but I would suggest using analogous colors. So those are 2 colors that are next to each other on the rainbow or on the color wheel, so that when you fade them together, they will create a pleasing and smooth, even gradient rather than a gradient that is going to become brown or neutralized. If you remember from our color wheel studies, colors that are across from each other on the color wheel, opposite colors, complementary colors, when you blend those together, you're going to get a brown or a neutral color. When you use analogous colors, you will get an even blended mix of those 2 colors that are analogous with each other. They like each other. They play well together. So I'm going to use this magenta and this orange that I already have, and those should blend together into sort of a fiery red. So, and I need more water. So with the gradients, you don't have to work super quickly. You can work slowly, but because you can reactivate, like if you work slow and it dries, you can reactivate that area with water. But it does help if you move at a slightly quick pace. Okay. And then blend those areas together. There. And then complete the bottom of the gradient. And you could even, if you wanted, if you have space, like I have space here, you could develop this gradient into a 3-color gradient. So I'm going to I'm going to now go into some yellow, and I'm going to now fade the yellow into the orange. So sort of a sunset effect here. that. All right, so that is 2-color, and in this case I did 3-color gradient, so I guess multiple color gradient is technique 2. Okay, technique 3 is dry brush. Oh, I should have done this first. Well, too late now. Okay. Dry brush. Dry brush involves, you need a dry brush, which I don't have right now, so I'm going to try to dry this brush. So in order for dry brush to work properly, you need to have a dry brush, and you need to have the color that you're going to use in your pan slightly damp. I'm not going to paint with this, I'm just going to add some water to it. So I'm going to get the surface of the pan wet. If it's not already wet, you want to make sure it gets wet. Okay, then you're going to take your dry brush, which hopefully is dry by now. And then you're just going to take the tips of your brush and just tap it on the very, very, very top of the pan. Don't like soak it up with a lot of paint. Just tap it on the top so that you're just loading the tips of the brushes, the bristles. And then if you want to test it, you can on the side before you try it. But what you're looking for is kind of a scratchy technique, sort of a wispy, scratchy texture. It's good for hair and grass fur, anything, bark on a tree. And I'm just going to test it by dry brushing on top of this green I made yesterday, and you can see that you get kind of a scratchy texture, whereas if you weren't using that dry brush technique with just the bristles loaded and the brush was wet, you'd see that you'd get a much different, you'd get like just a regular mark. So the difference between those two marks is that one of them, the brush is dry, so you're getting that sort of like wispy scratchiness, and then the other, if it's loaded with regular amounts of paint and water, you just get like a smoother, typically you get like a smoother mark. So okay, technique 4 is wet in wet. So this one's really fun. This one requires you definitely want to have a paper towel handy in case you have to blot. And you need clean water. So you might want to rinse out your water cup. Okay, so with your clean big brush and some water on the brush, you're going to very carefully paint an area of the painting with just water. So I'm going to use this big area over here. Also, really critical here is that you do not paint an area next to another area that is still wet. So you want to paint this area with water. So you are pre-wetting the surface. And then we just drop the color into the spreading water, and you get these kind of blooms that form when the wet watercolor hits the water you just put down. And you can control the size of the blooms by how much water you have on both the surface of your paper, and also how much water you have in your smaller brush that you're using to dab on, like that. You can, once the blooms have spread a little bit, you can then go in and with another color, go use a purple now. You can then add another drop inside that one, and that color will spread out. This technique can get a little out of control. Like if you put too much water down like that, it starts to really run away on you. Take your paper towel and just carefully blot that so that it doesn't run wild over your painting. Now the last technique is a bonus technique because you may or may not have tape with you, but if you have some tape, preferably not masking tape or Scotch tape. I mean, you can use masking tape. If you have masking tape, what you want to do is you want to take the masking tape and just gently, you want to stick it to the surface of like a table, which you can't see in the camera view, but if you just take the piece of tape and stick it to the surface of the table a few times to remove the tack. You want to, masking tape is very sticky, and if you put it down on your paper without detacking it first, it might tear your paper when you pull it up. Scotch tape will definitely tear your paper. I wouldn't use Scotch tape. I would only use masking tape after you detack it, or if you have some of this blue painter's tape around the house, this stuff's really good. What you don't want is to paint and then go to peel the tape up and then have the tape rip your paper. So sometimes even with the blue tape, I will detack it first and then stick it down. Masking is where you block off an area and then you are free to just go right over the tape and get super clean lines. And you can, I only masked 2 sections here just for time's sake, but I could have masked, this entire area. So now that I'm done painting that area, I'm going to carefully peel off my tape. And you always want to peel this way. You want to peel away from the painted area, and you can peel while it's wet as long as it's not too soaked up with paint. Oh, it did sneak under there. See that? Ugh. All right, so sometimes if you don't stick the tape down cleanly or the paper's a little bit bulged there, you can, sometimes the paint will go under. So because it's still wet though, I can just use a paper towel and I can wipe that away. Or I could do some lifting with a clean brush. I can do some lifting. Go back and take the clean brush and just, without doing too much, because I could end up getting the blue underneath to get ruined. So just a little bit of lifting and then blot that again to soak up the yellow, and that cleans up pretty well.